So I was just reinstalling the carriage back on the lathe and discovered something that I didn't realize when I put this together the first time, which is that these two bolts that were in these two holes right here, when you screw them all the way in, they don't even stick out far enough to press for the ends of the bolts to press on the jib. So these two outer bolts were the only thing that were really keeping the carriage somewhat tight. So these, I could see that when I take this one out of this position, it's a little longer. If I put this one in this position, it works and actually presses on it. So I'm curious whether or not these shorter ones, if I put them in the outer locations, if they work. If not, then it means that these two bolts need to be changed out to something longer. Yeah, see, that's as far as I can screw that in, because the jam nut won't go any further, because these two bolts are not all thread. So there's in other words, the nut can only go that far onto the bolt. So I need to find two more. These were clearly, by the looks of it, somebody had made these later. But let me see what I can find. Well, I would have liked to have gotten 4 screws that all matched, but the diameter and thread of these screws they're fine thread, and they're of a diameter that I had very few screws that fit. So I ended up going with all cap head screws, socket headed screws, and a couple of, that one's way longer than these other ones. This one's a little longer than these two in the middle, but I got them all snugged down so that it doesn't bind, but it's nice and rigid. There's like zero play there. Now if I run it up to the other end, it's probably going to get tight. I would expect it to, and it does. And that's because there is more wear concentrated in this area of the bed where most of the work's been done over the years than over here. So, you know, what are you going to do? In other words, what I was just saying is that if I run it up here, it starts to get tight. Actually, I haven't oiled the ways in a while, so I should do that first. Do it all in the wrong place. So anyways, see, it's extra tight up here, but if I loosen the jib to account for that, then what'll happen is it'll actually be too loose for my likings down here. You can see from about this point right here on, it moves pretty freely. And there actually is a little bit of play there. Very little though. Alright, so I've got my end screw support bracket on. I've got that tightened correctly. As long as I get the oil out, might as well hit that with oil again. I think maybe I'll get myself a tool bit, set up this tool post, and turn something in this lathe. Got several of the more traditional style tool holders here. This looks like a homemade tool holder. There we go. There's left and right tool holders for the tool post. Well, I just looked, and it turns out that all of these tool holders right here are actually too large for this lantern tool post that I have. And this lantern tool post does fit the compound. And I also don't hardly have any tool bits that would fit the holders that I do have.
okay, that fit this lantern. I also am missing a rocker for this lantern, which I think I found a rocker in one of the Kennedy toolboxes. But I don't know what I did with it. It's probably still in one of the Kennedy toolboxes. So I decided I'm just going to use one of these open-sided style homemade holders that came with this lathe that I know that the previous owner was using. And of course, these don't have the turn in them, the traditional turn to angle the bit up like that for the high-speed steel ground tools. But I did find a carbide, or yeah, I think it's carbide brazed tip tool that actually does have the right, it is actually the right, the one I had in there before was a left-hand tool, I think they call it, made to actually be in there to turn from left to right, like to turn going towards shoulder on the tailstock end. So anyway, so that should work out. I've got the angle set because there's a clearance angle in the front there, so I pretty much have the tool pointing straight on. In other words, it's going straight in, almost straight in. Compound set at, actually I didn't even check, but probably somewhere around 30 degrees. And I found a big piece of stock in my junk drawer, and this has clearly been turned by somebody, so I know this is good free machining steel by the looks of it. It does not fit inside the spindle, so I've got it all the way into the chuck as far as it'll go. So this part right here that's already been turned is sticking out pretty far from the chuck. So I don't think I want to turn here. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn in this larger diameter right here. Another nice thing I found was that the height of this holder right here, the spacer that's underneath was with this holder, and when I put this holder on here with this bit, it's almost perfect alignment as far as on center. So when I put that straight piece in there and I sight down from the tailstock end, it looks good. So there's the view sighting from the tailstock end, and you can see that piece of metal I've got in there is almost vertical. Okay, because I'm going to be cutting on this larger diameter here, I did slow the lathe down. And also because this piece isn't running true, I'm going to be taking an intermediate cut at first. Just realized from this angle you can't even see the chip. There, I think that'll be better. What that noise is. It's funny, that heavy squealing is coming from the spindle, back of the spindle. Let's try this again. Maybe I should slow this down. There we go. Now I'm taking a chip. Much better. Pull my sleeves up. Now it's getting to that line there where I stopped before, so it's going to start taking a heavier cut and see if we can handle it. Alright, so I think I can go a little faster. So I'm going to keep it in back gear. Well, compound drive is technically what this is. This Lathe doesn't really have a back gear. It has what's called compound drive. So let's see what happens. Tell from the sound that it's taking an uneven cut. That's because that's not running true in the chuck. Alright, so I've reached the end of the shoulder. Now, see if this part that I've turned is running concentric. Still hear some unevenness in there, but it's definitely getting better. Pop the speed up one more. Chips that it's making are little tiny curly cute pigtails, maybe about a 3/8 to a 1/2 inch long. That finish isn't bad. Alright, I'm going to run it back. I'm going to try and take a deeper cut. Touching off there. It should be about 10 thousandths. This ought to be interesting. Longer pigtails. See if I can get a shot of the chips. The jaws of the chuck are acting as a chip breaker. Not bad at all. Giving it the fingernail test, and that's nice and smooth. I mean, not bad at all. You can actually see with the high def camera here. So I mean, you can definitely see the lines, no doubt about it, but they're not perceptible with the fingertip. They're perceptible with the fingernail, but they're very fine and close together. So I'm definitely happy with the performance I'm getting out of this thing. Because I'd say that now I can demonstrate this as a working lathe to any prospective buyers. So I also noticed that this wobbling pulley on the end here that I was so concerned about didn't seem to be an issue. Of course, if I was turning a smaller diameter, I could probably up the speed, and then the vibration might become more critical. But I don't know. I'm thinking I might just leave it. A couple of the guys who have these lathes with this style wheel on them have talked about that they've had, similar issues where, in my case, I know it wasn't wobbling as bad as it is now. I know that when I had this off, I had trouble getting this, I think, off the shaft, and I used a puller on it and bent one of the spokes, and that's what caused my problem. Anyways, this is a cast wheel made out of this Zamic material. And I just know from my experience with trying to solder or braze the broken piece that I ended up having to make a new support for the. This is the original bracket that I had to replace with my own design. This is made out of the same material as this, and it's Zamic, and it's an alloy, and it's a bugger. And I just fear that even though I managed to get this to bend inadvertently, that if I go to bend it back, it might just break one of these spokes. And then once that happens, I'm really going to have no choice other than to replace this pulley, which some guys have done exactly that. They've just gone and sourced another pulley completely for this. But I'm going to leave that up to the next owner if they feel they don't like that pulley. Let's see. So I guess I could put some grease on the gears now. I'll quiet those down a little bit, I guess. So on that lowest speed, it didn't sound bad at all. But now taking it out of compound drive so that it is going at the top speed. So let's put some grease on it and see what it sounds like after we grease it up. Well, that's a little better. Of course, I was just watching it sling all the grease all over the place. Of course, I'm just using automotive bearing grease. And they do make gear grease, apparently, that probably is a lot stickier and would be better for this kind of a job. It actually initially threw quite a bit of grease because the excess grease was on there, but it seemed to have calmed down. So, I don't know. Funny, I read a comment today on one of the earlier, when I started just making the handle. I first started out making the handles on that episode. One of my viewers commented and said, they wouldn't even waste their time. That just leave the handle the way it was and sell it the way it is, and let the next owner worry about it. But I don't know. I like the way the handles came out, and I needed practice doing stuff on the lathe, so I turned those on the Vernon and did some work on the milling machine, played around with that. So I enjoyed doing that, so I don't really mind. Then the other thing I was talking about maybe doing was making a shield to go on here. So I might still do that. Just a metal cover to sit over this. Although it looks like by design, it looks like the cover never was intended to cover this whole back section of gear anyways. There's a slot right here where a tab on the cover probably stuck in. And then there's a stud sticking out right here with a nut on it. So I think the cover just kind of went over this part right here. Well, maybe I won't bother making the cover. Just thinking about how to cut the cover, and probably my plasma cutter, I'd have to make maybe a pattern and use my plasma cutter, and even then I don't know how good I would, how clean of a cut I would end up making with that, through a piece of sheet metal. So there was one other issue with this thing that I would like to rectify. And that would be with the tailstock. Ever since I've had this lathe, the tailstock has had the following issue, which is that when the tailstock is mounted on the lathe, so this is a two-piece tailstock. In other words, this piece right here that I've got my finger on is actually a separate piece from this base plate. And the reason for that is there's actually a groove right here and a part that sticks down in it. It's almost like a tenon that sits in there. And this screw right here, in conjunction with the screw on the back side here, you can actually loosen this screw and tighten this screw at the same time, or vice versa, and you can actually shift the tailstock over. And what that does for you is if you've got a piece between centers and you've got your tailstock offset, you can actually cut a short taper. Okay? So that's one way to cut a taper.